and English, so you can use them for the language that you would like to follow. And this event is also being live streamed in YouTube, Facebook, and also LinkedIn. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our Deputy Secretary General and OECD Gender and Diversity Champion, Mr. Ulrik Knudsen, to open this event. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Excellencies, distinguished guests and participants, good afternoon and welcome to this launch of the 5th edition of the SIGI. Welcome to a discussion on how donors and partners can address discriminatory and social norms that hinder gender equality. Now, gender equality is a strategic priority for OECD members and for our organization. It drives economic growth, it strengthens democracy, it enhances social cohesion, and it increases the well-being of all members of society. Only when women and men have equal access to resources and opportunities, only when gender-responsive policies are tailored for both men and women, only when there are concerted actions and measures taken by international organizations, donors, governments, and development partners, only then can we be sure that we're on the right path towards gender equality. Yet whilst the OECD's commitment to progress has been long-standing, and we have seen some narrowing in long-standing gender equality gaps, we need to accelerate the progress across the board. And the SIGI 2023 data also points to some positive signs. More countries have set legal age for marriage for girls and boys at 18 without exceptions. Countries that criminalize domestic violence have strengthened their legal frameworks to cover more types of abuse. And more countries have established gender quotas or adapted action plans to promote equality in political and public life. That's all very well. Yet, the SIGI data and several significant events globally also demonstrate that progress on gender equality is being undermined in many other dimensions, particularly in relation to discriminatory laws and social norms. For example, some actions have negatively affected women's autonomy over their bodies and agency, as demonstrated by the intense discussions and impacts of the overturning of Roe versus Wade in the United States. And we've all followed the events in Iran in recent months and in Afghanistan. These appalling events demonstrate that progress achieved over many years can be wiped out simply overnight. Closer to home, here in France, the French High Authority on Equality recently reported that sexism is not decreasing in France. Some of the most violent incidents are worsening and younger generations are more affected. Equally worrying, negative attitudes towards women's leadership persist. Nearly half of the world's population, 48%, continues to think that men make better political leaders. And you might think that was a thing of the past, and this is mainly, relevant for older generations, but at least the figures I saw while in Reykjavik in November actually told a different story. This is even worse, even more pronounced in younger generations. So it's not something that will automatically go away with the passing of time. Nearly half, 45%, also consider that, read this, when jobs are scarce, men should have more right to a job than a woman. Wow. So whilst we should celebrate progress made, our efforts must be redoubled in light of gaps, in light of the adverse trends impacting girls' and women's rights. I see today's launch as a very timely opportunity to commit ourselves to doing absolutely just that. We need to take stock of levels of discrimination in countries across the world, to identify ways to tackle discriminatory social norms and laws, and we need to explore how the SIGI data can help promote change at policy, program, and even at institutional levels. I look forward to hearing how donors and partners through collective efforts can address discriminatory social norms that hinder gender equality. We must, as I said, achieve more accelerated progress and fend off attacks. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ulrik. Now I would like to introduce Madame Bati Misika, who's our Head of Networks, Partnerships and Gender Division, who will present a very short presentation of the SIGI 2023, what it has to say.
Thank you very much, Yashin. This is just a glimpse so that to whet your appetite before our amazing speakers and panels. So let me take you to first, what is the SIGI? We love to use this image because I think it's very telling. If you think of an iceberg, what you see in your everyday life, that men make more money for similar jobs than women, or that there are more men in the labor force. What is causing that? It's not that there's not enough jobs. It's that women, for example, still hold unequal household responsibilities. In other words, they do a lot of unpaid care work. Or if they were married at 14, well, it's very hard to become tomorrow's CEO when that happens. So SIGI looks at laws and what people think is acceptable, and we're the only ones to collect laws across 179 countries, including informal laws. So again, this is what the SIGI is about. You can see the bottom left corner, the 4 dimensions of the SIGI are the same as in the previous edition, which allows us to have time series. Now, good news, the picture is not just grim. The gap between developed and developing countries is narrowing. So in the top categories now, which are very low discrimination and low discrimination, you now have half OECD countries, half non-OECD countries. That said, there's still 85 countries, there's still 40% of girls and women that live in countries with high or very high levels of discrimination. That means that in these countries, they do not have the same rights, they do not have the same opportunities, and this has an economic cost. So you can see on the map, what's in yellow is where we're missing data points, sometimes just a couple, which doesn't allow us to put countries in a category. But however, you can see that we're getting more and more data, which is also a very good sign. So the family sphere remains the point of most discriminations, and they're in the world, there's still 13% of girls that marry before the age of 18. So 20% of countries in the world do not grant daughters and wives the same rights to inheritance as sons and men. What does that mean concretely? You know, when we hear, oh, women should be entrepreneurs. Well, guess what? If your name is not on your house title, you work on the land, but you don't own it, and then you don't inherit because your brother does, who is going to give you a loan to buy a sewing machine and to go sell your products to markets? So this is a major bottom of the iceberg discrimination that has a much longer term effect than one would think. Again, unpaid care work is holding women behind. On average, they do 2.5 times more work than men, but in some region it's as high as 9 times. So imagine the day that you have, imagine you multiply by 9 the number, what you do in the home. What time does that leave you to be an entrepreneur, to have, to be a political representative? You can't, it's just impossible. So this, to tell you that this is not just a rights issue, it is an economic issue. And the two cannot be separated from one from the other. Anyways, on more positive news within the family, more and more countries are being more strict about the age of marriage. So fixing 18 as a no exception age of marriage. And a lot of these reforms have happened in sub-Saharan Africa, which is worth noting. Now, violence against women remains a global pandemic, meaning it is not a South issue, it is not a North issue, it is a global issue. We have it at our doorsteps. It exists in the developing world, and it is a real issue. Why are we in that situation? One, because the laws don't protect women sufficiently. Two, because people think it's acceptable, and it's not just men. Women themselves find it acceptable. 1 in 3 women thinks it is acceptable to take a beating under certain circumstances. Imagine if we divided this room and 1/3 of women would stand up here and say, oh yes, no, I took a beating because I burned dinner. And that's completely acceptable. I mean, so we need to also work on attitudes, and we need to work with men and women. And finally, another fact that we find extremely worrying is that in 20 countries, there is absolutely no data on intimate partner violence. So if you cannot quantify something, what does it say about it being a policy priority? How are you supposed to address it? It's like, you're operating in the dark. You don't even know what you're trying to address. So investment in data remains critical. Now, norms of masculinities, which equal to what it means to be a man, and according to women and men, they also have a terrible effect on women's economic empowerment. As Ulrich said, the statistics that 45% of the world population thinks that men should have more right to a job than women to a job is daunting. This is 2023. I mean, and you can see there are still a lot of countries where you cannot hold the same positions as men, as a woman. You cannot enter certain professions. Also, your right to equal pay, to equal remuneration for work of equal value is not guaranteed. And you cannot, for example, do night hours. So that excludes women because we hold these beliefs that the job is a manly occupation and women belong to the home. So in the public sphere, Women and Girls Agency remains limited. I would like to highlight progress, but it's still too slow. You can see that graph. Actually, it's going to take 30 years at this pace to achieve parity in political representation. I don't know if you were planning on waiting 30 years, but at least on this side of the table, we're not. So we need to continue to also push progress so that women's political representation becomes the norm and not an exception. There are quotas that have proven to work, and in a lot of African countries, in parliamentary regimes in particular, they have proven to be quite conclusive, to be working. Now, again, as has been said in introduction, half of the population thinks that men continue to make better political leaders than women. So women are also faced with violence when it comes to the political sphere. It's prejudice and violence, and it makes it very hard to be a political representative under these conditions. Now, what do we do? And this is what we're going to discuss now. There are actions that each of us can take, and each of our organizations. For governments, of course, governments and parliaments pass laws that actually protect women better, develop comprehensive strategies, and engage boys and men. This is not an us versus them issue. We have to go at it as a society and not just as a group that fights against another group, because this is a zero-sum game. It has to be a positive sum game. And then investment in data is critical. When it comes to ODA donors, well, of course, further support the front lines. That's one of the messages we cannot repeat enough. Women-led organizations receive very little funding, but they know the issues and they know how to fight the fight. So this is, again, a very important message. Data also needs to come into the picture, and let's innovate and use novel approaches, because we've seen that a lot of the old approaches actually haven't yielded much success. So it's time to reinvent ourselves. And finally, civil society is here to hold governments accountable, to help change the minds and hearts at the community level. It can be an imam, it can be a school teacher, or it can be Bollywood stars, as we will hear in a second. And with that, allow me to thank you very much for your attention. And if you'd like to play with your smartphone, now you can flash this code and find out all about what SIGI says for your country. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Betty. And now it is my great pleasure to introduce you Ms. Poonam Mutreja. She's the Executive Director of the Population Foundation of India, with more than 30 years of experience in the socio-development sector. In her speech, she will illustrate the different projects she's carrying out with the Population Foundation of India, specifically in the educational entertainment industry. Poonam, the floor is yours.
Oh, it's an honor to be here at the SIGI launch, and I really am grateful for this opportunity, and I want to thank all of you, and especially Bethel. Allow me to say a few words about the organization I work with, which was founded 50 years ago. PFI as we call the organization. Its mission is to advance sensitive policies and programs which are focused on gender, well-being of women and young people, as well as their health. We work specifically on areas of sexual reproductive rights, family planning, community engagement, and PFI aims to empower girls, young people through 5 pathways that diagram shows, but I'll quickly simplify it by saying the pathways are strategic engagement, social and behavior change communication, capacity building, and technical support to governments at the national and state level by both formulating policies as well as programs and corrections. I am only highlighting a few points, but key points where issues affecting women and their well-being. In most parts of the world, women and girls continue to be born in societies or social systems that are steeped in inequity and discrimination. Much of the challenges that women face have gotten further exacerbated due to COVID. Referring to the presentation on OECD's 2023 SIGI report, India scores on the indicators on discrimination against women. We are 60, well over the global average, reflecting the lack of agency and autonomy of Indian women. There is global evidence that entertainment education can be used as a key strategy or a tool and does transform social norms. Over the past few decades, entertainment education has been successfully used globally, especially in Mexico, Brazil, South Africa is pioneer on entertainment education and changing behaviors, and Nigeria. And by weaving appropriate media messages, a compelling story that entertains and educates. Entertainment education increases not only knowledge, but promotes positive attitudes and changes behaviors. However, in order to contribute to change at scale, we need positive messaging. We need messaging that can reach millions across the country in a non-threatening way, across the world, I should say. An effective medium to reach millions has been traditionally television, but social media and the advance of technology is compelling us to use both. Sadly, however, if we look at India, majority of the popular channels, which have huge number of soaps, are just the opposite. The female protagonists dress up from head to toe, but have nowhere to go. The jobs are not there, as was said earlier. And the only place they have is either the kitchen or looking after the children at home. And after a few decades of working on women's issues, I was restless. With every step forward on gender issues, I found we were taking 2 steps backwards, and Roe versus Wade was mentioned earlier. Unless we did something I felt drastic on changing social norms, this is 10 years ago, 12 years ago, I made the resolution, the pilots and the small-scale interventions that I've been part of will not make the difference. And in 2023, we cannot afford to only talk about incremental changes. Interventions will have to dent patriarchy in a major way. So मैं कुछ भी कर सकती हूँ, which you see different elements on your screen. Throwing myself the challenge, I conceived this serial, called it I, a woman, can achieve anything. And in Hindi, it's मैं कुछ भी कर सकती हूँ. And for the women to just say that, women who don't even take their names, to be able to say that is very empowering in itself. But I'll tell you more about how empowering it was. So I'm going to refer to it as I, a woman, can achieve anything. And I aspire every woman in the world to internalize that. This program was launched in 2014 and was directed by India's leading Bollywood director, theater director, and film director, Feroz Abbas Khan. And this program has emerged as a global benchmark for using the power of entertainment education to trigger changes in attitudes and behaviors. The plot is woven around Dr. Sneha, the chief protagonist, who confronts the realities of gender inequalities reflected in sex selection, abortion, child marriage, violence against women, the unequal access to safe sanitation, there's public defecation by women, which attracts, amongst other things, the safety issues, especially sexual abuse. Many rapes happen when women go out for open defecation. So limited reach of the reproductive health, constraints on the rights and adolescence of not only adolescents, but young couples. And we did formative research, which was done to inform the content of the message for production, literature review, and we learned global literature review, and we learned what to do and what not to do from the global programs I mentioned in the countries earlier. And the key issues around this initiative included both enablers, the research included enablers and barriers in accessing health, family planning, and other services in the community. The information sought to refine outreach strategy and program approach. We used a positive deviant approach, and that is at the heart of the success of this program, I'd like to say, which was undertaken to discover positive deviants within the community, innovative solutions that had been devised by the community themselves, whether it was on contraception, sex selection, amongst others. This helped us identify the local wisdom as well as good practices in the community, which could be then amplified with entertainment and education added. The findings from these inquiries were incorporated in the design phase of the serial. The role models exemplified by the positive deviance behavior served to build the character as well as the script for the serial. We had 90 PD, which is positive deviant stories. We also used something called, we used markers in new terminology denoting positive behavior change, and we gave popular phrases like "Desh badlega jab mard badlega." The country will change when the man changes. I'm looking at you. This is not to put any pressure. It was just an accident. So the second is "Aurat ki marzi ka din," a day when a woman takes all decisions. So we had this in every few days, we had this every month and as a marker. Lambi Sagai, to denote a prolonged engagement for delaying age at marriage, which Bethel referred to. Swachhata Elan, pledge for cleanliness. And these markers were then used across community. What we have is, if you see the slide, we had an integrated voice response, which is the Facebook of the poor. We received 2 million phone calls where people could call and get a missed call. We called back and they could leave a message. They could ask a question or participate in a quiz or give their views on the serial. So we had ongoing monitoring. We had celebrity engagement. Farhan Akhtar, who you see on the screen, is India's leading film director, actor, scriptwriter, and a singer. He has done three major, to popularize the serial, he's done three major concerts, Facebook Live, where we had 4 million audience and we were trending all night. He brought in, and we brought in many other celebrities who have championed this serial because they believe in it. We were on television, which is the national TV, government's public broadcasting trust. We were in the communities where we worked with 500 NGOs and created groups. And finally, we have the AI chatbot. You see the younger version of Dr. Sneha, who's become a companion to young people on Facebook, on WhatsApp messaging. So that is using artificial intelligence. And then finally, we use digital media in a big way. So the 360-degree approach that you see on the screen. Since its launch in 2014, these are the numbers. And over 3 seasons, we had a cumulative reach of 150 million people in India. Over television, radio, social media, and so on. We received 2 million phone calls, which were the most helpful analysis tool for us. The IVRS calls from viewers. We reached 30 million people through our social media handles. Now on to the evaluation. I also want to mention, before I go into the evaluation, the Ministry of Health, of Family Welfare in India, the government showed immense trust and impact in the potential of our program, where they sent messages to 1 million frontline health workers, because we need to change not just the community, but it is the frontline health workers or education workers who come from the same community with the same social norms. We thus emerged a wonderful example of working together, of bringing together resources, different quarters of convergence, and we reach scale. We have to reach scale. So if I were to show some highlights on the evaluation, each program and evaluation surveys were conducted after each season. We had 3 seasons with 52 episodes each, which underscored a positive shift, not just in knowledge, but perception among viewers and their attitudes. We increased awareness among not just young men and women, but also key decision makers like the mother-in-law. End-line evaluation, everybody will identify with that, right? End-line evaluations also demonstrated good viewer retention and audience interest in pursuing all the episodes and future episodes. But the best news for us was that 48% men were our viewers. With a name like I, a woman can achieve anything in a masculine, caustic world. We were very, very happy, and we can share some tricks that we use to do that. Some of the key, each season I have taken 3 seasons and highlighted some of the key achievements, and I want to refer to from 60% men and women believing it was legitimate to be beaten by their partner, as the SIGI report also showed. It came down to 40%. 8% women plucked the courage to negotiate family planning with their husbands, when empowered, educated women in India are not able to do it. I am able to negotiate. Importance of birth spacing. Mother-in-laws increased from 57% to 86%. Now, mother-in-laws have been as far as women's autonomy to have the number of children they want, she has been a key player and a negative player. So we are very happy about this change. Almost from season 2, I would like to highlight that 50% of young people asked others to watch, and India has 630 million young people below the age 29. 50% of the respondents expressed an interest and asked us to bring in season 3. This is evaluation of season 2. 33% married male viewers said they were likely to use modern contraceptives in the next 6 months. Season 3, some highlights. 66% viewers are likely to discuss about the timing of the first child and postponing marriage. Almost equal number of men and women reported watching the serial, knowledge about modern contraceptives, knowledge about 69% viewers reported to likely discuss a gap between 2 children and limit the number of children they would have. And we have detailed studies which were done by, what happened? What did I do? I lost my. Okay, I'll go to my next slide, which is not there anymore. PFI documented select studies, select stories of real life women who were inspired by the program. And we chose women and men who chose to change social norms. One such story is that of Nirma Devi, who was chosen as BBC's 100 most influential women in 2017. Which names, BBC names influential and inspirational women around the world every year, as you know. A resident of Goa district, a resident of Gaya district in Bihar. You have an intern here from Gaya, from the district in the organization, who I just met today. From a diminutive girl who married early, at an early age. Now she is the brand ambassador of the Ministry of Health and Family Planning. 21-year-old Latkovar became the first girl in her village to go to college, inspired by मैं कुछ भी कर सकती हूँ. And not only she negotiated with her family and she said to them, invest in my education, in what you want to give me for your dowry. 10 girls within a year went to college from the same village. And now we are counting. Men of Chhatarpur, I want to most importantly talk about. These are men who are men of Chhatarpur. It's a very backward district in the middle of India, in Madhya Pradesh, a small town in India, transformed from self-confessed habitual wife beaters to pledging to share responsibility of family planning and childcare with their spouses and cooking. A rare situation for India. I'd like to play now a short video showcasing the impact and potential of मैं कुछ भी कर सकती हूँ.
गांधी जी कहा करते थे अर्जुन कि इस देश की आत्मा इसके गांव में बसती है.
Population Foundation of India is using the power of entertainment education to alter and transform deeply entrenched social behaviors. A series that entertains, provides knowledge, expounds ideal behaviors, and challenges deep-rooted regressive practices. Season 1 consisted of 52 episodes, dealt with age at marriage,
उसका मर्द कमलेश चौधरी आदमी नहीं है, राक्षस है राक्षस. जबरन उसके साथ शारीरिक.
sex selection, child marriage,
शादी करके आप उसकी जिंदगी को सूली पर चढ़ाना चाहते हैं.
birth spacing,
बच्चों के बीच में कम से कम 3 साल का अंतर होना बहुत जरूरी है.
and quality of healthcare. In season 2, consisting of 79 episodes, Dr. Sneha decides to serve the community and improve their lives. It focuses on nutrition, reproductive health,
कॉन्डम के अलावा और भी बहुत सारे उपाय हैं, जैसे कि गोलियां हैं, कॉपर टी है,
mental health, hygiene, and substance abuse.
ये नशे का असर है, ड्रग्स का बहुत हैवी डोज है.
To get the message across to a large number of people, a 360-degree communication approach was adopted. Celebrities and Bollywood personalities supported the initiative. Perceptions about the ideal gap between two children increased. Women became more confident in accessing family planning services. They were less hesitant in seeking advice from health workers about contraceptives. Fewer women now believed it was okay to be beaten by a husband if the wife went out without informing him.
अब अगर आपने एक और बार अपनी बीवी पर हाथ उठाया ना, तो नतीजा अच्छा नहीं होगा.
More women now believed that they can hold leadership positions in local government. The series continues to inspire young women to assert themselves and believe that they are capable of achieving anything.
आपने हमारी जबरदस्ती शादी की. हम तो पढ़ना लिखना चाहते थे.
क्या करेगी पढ़ लिख कर? प्रधानमंत्री बनेगी?
हाँ, बनूंगी मैं प्रधानमंत्री.
That I hope was entertaining in spite of all the negative consequences of women's lack of agency and autonomy. I want to quickly finish now with some messages, especially for donors. As we go forward, I want to reiterate some key learnings from the initiative. SPCC is indeed a cost-effective way to change communities and reach communities. It cost us approximately little less than $1 for reaching each member of the target audience. Just making good programs is not enough. There are 500 million social media users in India as of January, and we need 360-degree approach, which leverages digital and other mediums to reach a wider audience. And this holds true for much of the world. SBCC programs need to focus on social change, changing social norms, if not just the communities, but we also need to change the healthcare providers. We need to make programs that reach men as enablers, beneficiaries, and SBCC programs are a non-threatening way, and this came out in our research, to reach the men. The positive deviance approach taught us that characters need to reflect the reality, the real life situation in communities, and they have to be practical solutions, not solutions made in boardrooms or meeting rooms. Working with the government is a cost-effective way to take programs to scale and reach especially the last mile. And also the government, as in India, they acknowledge the adaptive challenge of creating behavior change they cannot do. So I really want to underscore the fact that this is a responsibility and a role, a strategic role that donors and international agencies can take on. Formative research and robust and independent evaluations are very imperative to measure the impact of SBCC interventions if they are going to become a sustainable long-term reality. And finally, don't forget, we mustn't ever forget that we mustn't forget entertainment and humor. People don't want to listen to messaging and endless suggestions without that. I hope I've made a smart case for SBCC programs, but I also want to highlight that 𝐻𝐀𝐔𝐁𝐃 defies the conventional wisdom and suggestion that changing social norms around gender is difficult. Our evaluation defied that. And believe me, I had our evaluation evaluated because I didn't believe you could do such a big change. But I would like to say that this big change has happened not only because we made a good program, but the aspirations of girls and women and communities across the world has changed because they have more access to the media and they know how the other half lives. And if you don't deal with the aspirations, especially of the young people today and young girls, remember, it's a threat to your society. We cannot have unhappy, large number of young people across the world whose aspirations are not being met, and the success of programs will lie in their aspirations. Research shows their aspirations have changed beyond behavior change. And as we look ahead, we need policies in place, sure, for women's empowerment, but what is equally important is a paradigm shift in social and cultural norms and false notions of masculinity and patriarchy. The success of our program and several other EE programs demonstrates clearly that people are ready to change. And I want to end by quoting Gandhiji, be the change you wish to see in the world. And that's my message to development players, donors, and institutions like OECD, that we need to be able to be inspired by Gandhiji, who I think was the world's most brilliant strategist. Thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you very much, Poonam. This was very inspirational. I would just like to remind all of our participants who are also joining us online. We have about 200 people who are joining us online as well, that there are interpretation as well in French and in English, so please use that. And now we are going to move to our next panels. We have a stellar lineup of speakers, and I would like to introduce Mr. Roderick Norman as our moderator. Mr. Roderick Norman is an independent consultant with more than 20 years of experience working between the public and private sector and development finance. Roderick, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Haitian. Thank you very much. And wow, Poonam. That was very inspiring, and thank you for the words. And I take away from that just one thing: a woman can achieve anything. How powerful is that? Right? But I do need to give context when you looked at me because of men. It was because before we were having a conversation, and she asked me, "What am I doing here?" And I told her I'm here in Paris because I'm following my wife, who had followed me for 20 years as a banker.
You're going to be our next positive deviant story.
No problem. Listen, I'm excited about this next panel, and I'm going to spend about an hour and a half with you for this panel as well as the next panel. But what a great segue into this panel in terms of title: Tackling Discriminatory Social Institutions, What Have We Learned? We are looking forward to a great panel discussion where we'll hear stories of successful actions that have occurred, as well as policies, projects, and programs from different regions of the world. We have represented Asia, we have Latin America, and we have Africa. Just in terms of, for the sake of time, I'm going to introduce each panelist, then give them a couple of questions, directional questions before they speak, and welcome to all of the panelists online, and welcome to everyone who's joining us both in person as well as online. And then we'll have a quick opportunity for some further dialogue and further questions. As Haishan said, my name is Rod Norman. I'll be your moderator today. I've spent my career across public sector, private sector, working for organizations like the Millennium Challenge Corporation, JP Morgan, as well as more recently the African Development Bank. And that's important because in each of those roles, it gave me a greater appreciation for gender issues as a financier, as someone who was raising capital. But I can honestly say that it's the ever-evolving roles of me as a father, me as a son, me as a son-in-law, as well as me as a husband, and quite honestly, me as also as a colleague, as a citizen, that have shown me and given me a deeper awareness of where there are issues around social norms and gender. And it also shows me that, I must, and we all must, continue to be students and learn from things that are before us, because awareness is key. And so each of the next panelists is going to talk about what they and their organizations are doing. Let me start by introducing each of them, and I'll start with Ambassador Sibyl Galvin-Gomez. Welcome. I'll give a brief background. Ambassador Gomez has spent her career in a number of senior finance roles within the Mexican government, including with the Ministry of Finance and the Mexican Central Bank. Prior to her current duties, Ambassador Galvin's position was of Director General of Analysis and Statistics for CONSAR, the Mexican National Commission of the Retirement Savings System. Welcome, Ambassador. You are the ambassador of Mexico to the OECD. Can we talk a little bit, based on your experiences, about key issues in reducing gender-based discrimination in Mexico? As we all know, Mexico was the first Latin American country to have a feminist foreign policy. What were some of the key success factors and lessons learned in terms of tackling discriminatory norms? Ambassador.
Well, thank you, Roderick, and I am really very happy to participate here today. Mexico has been a strong supporter for SIGI and for everything that has to do with gender in this house. So yes, gender-based discrimination and how to reduce that. I think this is not only a reality in Mexico, but in many other countries where traditional male-dominated societies are still strong. It's exactly the reason why we are here today and why the SIGI itself exists. The persistence of discriminatory social norms and stereotypes of how a woman should behave and what she's able to do. These are norms we have been born into, that have existed forever in our patriarchal societies and are, in some cases, hard to get rid of since they have become invisible over time as we get used to see life through that lens. As we know, these norms reinforce gender identities and end up determining power relations within societies, constraining both men and women into being a certain way or doing certain things. The first step toward progress is certainly to recognize these norms exist and analyze them, measure their prevalence in our societies, which the SIGI has done wonderful well. In order to move forward, we must measure, know where we stand, and make sure to track our progress. So regarding Mexican experience, Mexican women have demanded our government to address gender-based violence in society at large and the workplace, to recognize their important contribution to the unpaid care provided by millions of women, both which become more evident after COVID lockdowns. So there has been a concerted effort in Mexican government through the last decade to level the playing field by ensuring gender parity in Congress, in the cabinet, and currently our election law established that all political parties must guarantee gender parity of candidates for all elected positions. Back in 2019, our Congress passed constitutional reforms to incorporate gender parity in everything, including the 3 branches of government, states, and municipalities. So yes, Mexico became the first country in the global South to put together and adopt a feminist foreign policy. Our feminist foreign policy is based on a set of 5 principles that seek to guide the government's action to reduce and eliminate structural differences, gender gaps and inequalities in order to build a more just and prosperous society. So first, a foreign policy with a gender perspective and a feminist agenda. Second, parity within the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Third, a ministry free of violence that is safe for all. 4, visible equality. And 5, feminism in all areas of the ministry. Specific actions have been defined for each of these principles, such as the launch of the Foreign Policy Principles Handbook, the accession of the Mexican Ministry of Foreign Affairs to the He for She initiative, certification of Mexican diplomatic and consular representations for workplace equality, and a series of workshops organized for ministry personnel on these issues. Our feminist foreign policy now stands on a set of principles that seek to promote, through foreign policy, government action that helps reduce and eliminate structural gaps and gender inequalities through a horizontal human rights approach, taking into account gender perspective and intersectionalities in all aspects of our foreign policy, to make women's contribution to foreign policy and global action more visible, focusing within and beyond the ministry. The horizontal nature of this effort has been a key aspect of its success in raising awareness regarding these issues, not only in the ministry, but in the over 150 foreign consular and diplomatic representations of Mexico around the world. We have made sure to follow these principles within our offices by promoting inclusive language in official and unofficial communications. We have provided training on gender sensitivity to our colleagues, both male and female. I believe that we will achieve great progress if we involve men in the conversation, and proof of this is our OECD Gender and Diversity champion, Ulrich. We were very excited to hear that according to the Foreign Policy Index of the International Center for Research on Women, our feminist foreign policy ranks in the top 3 of the world, together with those of Sweden and Norway. This index assesses the role that countries play in eradicating the differentiated effects that multiple and interconnected crises have on the lives of women and girls in all their diversity. So lastly, let me share with you some great insight. At the beginning of this week, we received in the OECD, Mr. Christine Lagarde, that, as you all know, was the first woman to be a finance ministry of any G7 country, as well the first woman to head the Monetary Fund, and now the first woman heading the European Central Bank. And I make this question to her. So if we are so have embarked in all this, what we're missing? And I will share with you the answer that she gave me. And she said, well, I think we should keep in mind how can we advance this? And she said, we should focus on 3 L's: learning, labor, and leadership. And for this, we need more investment and better data. She said, we must have faith in the great talent and capacity of women and girls. And she asked us to imagine if Lehman Brothers had been Lehman Sisters, how different things could have been after the meltdown of the financial system. So to end, we must not give up and keep on fighting for equality, both at work and at home. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. For anyone who missed that, it was learning, labor, and leadership. Okay. Yes, labor. Okay, now we move to Mrs. Alessandro Orofino co-founder and executive director of Nosas in Brazil. Can you hear me?
Yes, absolutely. Hi, everyone. Good morning.
Excellent.
Well, good afternoon for you, but good morning for me.
Good afternoon. I'm going to do a brief introduction and then I'll turn it to you for your remarks. Ms. Orofino is the executive director of Gnosis, which is a woman-led laboratory for civic engagement and activism in Latin America. They develop methodology and technology to equip young citizens with tools and tactics to impact policymaking. And since 2011, Gnosis projects have mobilized more than 500,000 activists using a variety of custom tactics. Welcome to our panel today. Just as guiding questions, tell us about your views on bridging the gap between policymaking and the enforcement of laws to effectively address gender-based violence in Brazil. Are there examples of collective action, prevention, reduction, and elimination of violence against women and girls in Brazil that you can share?
Absolutely. Good afternoon again, everyone. I think the best example that I can draw upon from our work is a project that we launched in 2016 called Mapa do Acolhimento. Mapa do Acolhimento uses collective action to support women in situations of violence across the country. And the way we do that is by matching women who seek support with a network of pro bono lawyers and mental health professionals that offer their services free of charge. We've done that in over 1,000 municipalities. And since the pandemic started, we've been receiving direct requests for support from about a woman every hour. We have a network of over 12,000 professionals that have signed up to be volunteers. And they are matched with the women who seek support through custom technology that we have developed. So the way it works essentially is that a woman who needs help reaches out to us either through WhatsApp or our website. And in seconds, she will be matched with a volunteer that we have trained and selected that can support her in her town or online if we cannot find anyone near her. This is just an example of how civil society can organize solidarity at scale and how that can have a direct impact on the lives of thousands of women in situations of violence. However, we also know that this is not enough. This is a continental country with deeply entrenched gender norms and one of the worst rates of femicide and other kinds of violence against women in the world. So what we have done for the past, well, now it's been 2 to 3 years, we sort of shifted the focus of the community to not only provide direct services, but also advocate for better policies, particularly at that intervention window between the time a woman asks for help and the time she actually suffers a worst episode of violence. Research shows that in Brazil, over 70% of women who are killed previously asked for help from the state, typically through a hospital or a police department. So they actually spoke up, they asked for help, and they were still victims of femicide. It just shows that we are failing them. This is not necessarily a problem of women suffering in silence, although that exists as well, of course. But the large majority of women are reaching out and they're not getting the support they need. So what we are advocating for right now is that the model that we have developed, that we have shown to work and to dramatically decrease the cases of femicide amongst the women that are in our network, that model be used as the basis for a national policy that actually gives women personalized, direct support when they seek out help. Today, typically, if a woman asks for help in Brazil, when she's in a situation of violence, again, she either goes to a hospital or a police department, or she calls a national hotline, which was, for the past 4 years, it didn't receive enough resources, so it wasn't working that well. The current government has pledged to bring it up back to speed, but either way, that woman would talk to someone and then she will have no other way of contacting that someone again if an episode of violence arises again. So she goes to the hospital, she speaks to a social worker, to a doctor, to a nurse, she goes back home, she's alone again. Or what we are advocating for is direct support that lasts throughout that cycle. So that woman has an advocate inside of one of the social services that are already available to them. She doesn't have to tell her story again next time she seeks out support. She doesn't have to get re-victimized, and she can be pulled out of that cycle of violence with the support that she needs. We are doing that already at scale through our direct service model, but we know that the Brazilian state could do that at a much bigger scale, using the networks that were developed by civil society, not only us, but other groups on the ground that have taken the matter into their own hands in many ways. And I also believe that the fact that we were able to create such a powerful, active network of volunteers in a country that still has limited opportunities for women in higher education and professional and the workplace, the fact that so many women stepped forward and said, I will dedicate my talent and my time to supporting other women, and I will do that voluntarily, it just shows that there is a strong community of particularly young women that are more than willing to roll up their sleeves and do the work. And that in and of itself can challenge gender norms and can help us make some real progress in the future. So I'm really optimistic. I think my generation of women and the generations that will follow me will be the ones leading the way and putting an end to the epidemic of femicides and gender-based violence in my region, in my country. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that intervention. We next turn to Asia, Ms. Priyanti Fernando, who is on the line. Are you with us?
Yes, I am. Hello.
Excellent. Thank you. Hello, how are you?
I'm fine. It's good evening or almost good night for me, but hello.
Yes. Let me introduce Ms. Fernando, who is the Executive Director of the International Women's Rights Action Watch for Asia Pacific. It's an international NGO with a mission to disrupt structures, systems, and institutions that violate women's human rights and to engage in movement building, to amplify women's voices and activism. As a social development and communications professional with more than 30 years of experience, she has worked globally, Asia, Africa, UK, Australia, leading organizations and serving on boards of civil society organizations. Welcome to our panel this afternoon, Ms. Fernando.
Thank you, and thank you for inviting me. As you said, I'm a women's human rights activist, and the main part of my work is working towards making the promise of the Convention on the Eradication of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, that is CEDAW, a reality. So I see gender equality as fundamentally a human rights issue, and I welcome SIGI because it's increasing the body of data available in this area. I wasn't aware of its existence till this event, and by increasing the body of data, I think it helps us able to hold states accountable under CEDAW. But having said that, about the value of SIGI, I think we know that different groups of women and girls are differentially impacted by these various restrictions of their rights, and that aggregated quantitative data does not cover the multiple discriminations that many marginalized groups face. So I think it is important to complement these statistical indices with stories on the lived realities of these women and girls. I would like to share with you what we are learning in Euro-Asia Pacific from the many marginalized groups whose voices otherwise would not be heard in this forum. Marginalized women such as sex workers, migrant and refugee women, ethnic minority women, indigenous and rural women, and the LGBTQI community what we learn from them is that they have little or no access to justice, that their rights continue to be violated with impunity, and that the state, society, and legal community do very little to protect their rights or enable them to have redress. So I think when we are focusing, what I would like to focus on is not so much about what can be done to reform laws and legal frameworks, but how states and non-state actors can do more to implement those laws, including the ones that already exist, and also adhere to some of the global normative standards to which many states have signed up. Every year, our organization co-creates the Global South Women's Forum, where Global South women come together to discuss issues of concern to them. In 2021, when we created the Forum on Environmental Justice, we heard, for instance, because we work internationally, women from Uganda's West Albertine Rift area and women from villages in Western DRC talk about how corporates and governments acquired community land for building oil refineries and for building mega hydro projects without prior informed consent or without commensurate compensation. This is despite the existence of strong safeguarding policies and sort of international institutions adopting policy frameworks for dealing with forced displacement. So some women were able to fight this land grabbing successfully in court, but mostly the corporations intimidated those others who were illiterate and unaware of their rights and kind of seduced them with false promises. But last year, that is in 2022, the Global South Women's Forum hosted a global tribunal for women workers, which we created with 20 other organizations from the labor and women's movements. 73 women gave their testimonies from 24 different countries and 12 different sectors of the labor market. There were sex workers, entertainment workers, migrant workers, street sweepers, street vendors, home-based workers, workers in offices, migrant hospital cleaners, domestic workers, and agriculture workers. And they told us in 16 different languages how they were exploited sexually and financially, how their health needs were not considered, how they were intimidated from organizing themselves and from joining unions, and how there was absolutely no equal pay for work of equal value. Each of them had a story to tell about how their employers violated their rights and how the authorities and society at large took no notice, or worse, stigmatized them and discriminated against them. Many were speaking out for the first time. All of them wished for the world to listen to them. They wanted redress for the harms done to them, but mostly they were speaking out because they didn't want these harms repeated to other women anywhere. And what I want to say is, it is not that many of the countries represented did not have laws that were designed to protect their rights. So if you take my own country, Sri Lanka, we have a portfolio of labor laws that protect workers and are a result of a long history of socialist labor movements. Yet many of these laws are only observed in the breach. We know, for instance, that in the apparel industry, which is like our major export industry, even though there is an entitlement of workers are entitled to 7 days leave, sick leave, and 14 days of annual leave, most workers exercising their right to take leave are often forced to forego bonuses, and their requests are met with reprimands and disciplinary action. We have a very strong maternity benefits ordinance that stipulates that the employer should provide nursing facilities or time out to women workers for nursing their children. But these are almost never provided to lactating mothers. So women juggling their care responsibilities, they opt out of the formal system, and workers in formal labor, hired through what we in Sri Lanka call manpower agencies. These agencies are unregulated. They supply workers to the apparel industry, And the system allows employers to circumvent labor laws and pay lower wages. The whole scenario is an exploitation of society's gender norms and stereotyping of women as primary caregivers. So this is just one example among the stories of workers who were from ethnic minorities or who are migrants or gender non-conforming or who work in Lebanon, Bangladesh, Vietnam, Malaysia. The exploitation is no different and sometimes worse. And for women with disabilities, you can forget the rights at work. The right to work is also a big challenge. So while many of our countries do need to reform their laws, just expanding one statute book itself does not foster gender equality. Laws have to be implemented, and those who breach them have to be held accountable, whether they are governments or employers. And most definitely the corporations that control global value chains with their head offices and shareholders based in the global north in countries of the OECD, right? Women also need to be aware of their rights, as speakers have said before, to have the civic space to organize and the means to access justice. Discrimination cannot be eradicated by reforming the legal system if we continue to prioritize economic growth or attracting FDIs over compliance to international labor standards, or if we do not protect women's human rights, say in our trade agreements, or if transnational corporations continue to consider profits more important than women's lives. So I think these are important considerations that we learned from the women themselves in the Global South Women's Forums, and which I want to place on the table today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next, we turn to Ms. Benita Diop, who is the founder and president of Femmes Africa Solidarité, an international NGO dedicated to promoting peace, security, and development in Africa. She has played an instrumental role in achieving gender parity with the African Union Commission and has been named one of the 100 most influential people by Times Magazine and 𝐻𝐸𝐵. We are delighted to have you with us, Madame Diop.
Thank you, moderator. Thank you very much.
I'll just say a quick question just to direct your comments.
Thank you.
But you are a strong advocate for gender equality and a leading advocate for women's leadership in peace and security efforts on the continent. Can you talk a little bit about Africa Union's efforts to advance positive masculinity as a means for eliminating gender and violence in Africa, and also some concrete actions that can better address social norms and empower women and girls in Africa? Discriminatory social norms and empower women in Africa. Thank you.
Thank you so much, moderator, for these questions. But let me first start by thanking, the OECD Gender and Diversity Champion who opened the discussion, but also the entire team. I think the initiative is commendable and should be upscaled. So coming back to your question, but I will start by just explaining, because we think that Africa is one country, but it's a whole 54 countries, and try to explain that the diversity and our society are organized around, in many places, the patriarchal social system in which men are accorded social privilege over women and are viewed as the de facto leaders, and is rooted in our cultural and religious belief and practices. So that system, the patriarchal society, also define
the appropriate role of men and women, with men taking up roles in the public sphere are leaders, providers, and protectors, while women are allocated caregiving roles in family. And I'm happy, Mr. Moderator, that yourself, you say that today you are following up your wife, because this is, I think, the equality that we are looking for right now. So this notion in Africa are further perpetuated through the agent of socialization, through the family, the education system, but also the workplace, in the media and religion. And formalized through legislation sometime and policies. And they manifest as chronic underrepresentation of women in decision-making roles, in governance, in peace and development processes, through high-level incidences, as have been said by all the previous speakers, of sexual and gender-based violence and feminization of poverty, among others. So therefore, to change this trend, we need to recreate the socialization system and process by introducing gender equality norm setting standard to regulate attitude and behavior in laws and in all our social institutions. So what the African Union have done, in your question, the continental body, we have established a set of standards, including, of course, the international one, CEDAW and others, but the gender parity principle that call for 50-50 representation of women in all decision-making roles. I think this is the only one that have institutionalized it and it's become reality. The top leader of the AU is 4 commissioner and men and women, 50-50. The Maputo Protocol, which called for the elimination of all forms of discrimination against women. And I think that it's complementary to CEDAW, but this protocol is the most progressive one that we have seen, because it talks about issues of female genital mutilation, but also against child marriage and abortion as well. And the Solemn Declaration on Gender Equality, which is, as I would say, a mechanism that helps us to evaluate implementation of the gateway, gender equality and women's empowerment in the continent. So I think what I would say is the member states in Africa, many of them have put in place gender laws, policies, and practices with good result. For example, in Rwanda, somebody have talked about Africa in the context of quota system. 61% of women, there's the first one in the world, Rwanda, but also Namibia and Senegal will have more than 40%. My country, Senegal, have more than almost parity in our parliament. And also in peace and security, the African Union appointed it, the first one, followed by others, the special envoy on women, peace and security. So in the world, but now we have other special envoy, like in Norway and other countries, whose role is to enhance the policy environment on women, peace and security, which resulted, for example, in Africa, when we started this process of evaluation, we had 17 countries that have national action plan. Right now, we have 34 countries that have adopted action plan, but it's not sufficient to have the action plan. What we need is to have also the indicators to evaluate, but also to make sure that they are implemented. It's not about the plan, it's about implementation. So let me just say also what the African Union has made in making sure that we have a growing number in our military and police because we did the advocacy through our contributing troop, but also zero tolerance policy in our peacekeeping operation. So in addition, we also create what we call FEMWISE, which is established in 2017 to increase women participation in mediation process. Now we have other countries, the European Union and others have created also their mediator network, women mediators network, to follow the example of the African Union as well. We have also put in place, with the support of the government of Germany, the Africa Women Leaders Network, which is led by Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, former president of Liberia, but many other women leaders in the continent. So the AWLIN was established as platform to mobilize and women leadership in all sectors to drive action toward the transformation of Africa, especially agenda that we have, Agenda 2063. We also make sure that gender inclusive peace process where women be at the table by using their representation, but also the agenda that can bring when it comes to negotiation, but other talking about violence against women, but also how they can contribute to rebuild their nation. So with other member states, but other stakeholders, we developed the Continental Result Framework. It's also unique in reporting on women, peace, and security to hold our government accountable for their commitment to peace and security agenda. Right now, we are at the circle of the cycle of the third cycle of reporting by our member state. And I think this is unique. We're reporting to the Security Council on the implementation of this framework, but we report to the Peace and Security Council on how our member states are implementing the Women, Peace and Security agenda. In particular, prevention, making sure that laws are put in place and safe space are created for women. As we know that women's body have been used and misused as a weapon of war. So let me also come to the second issue or the first one that you raised on positive masculinity. I think all the other speakers have mentioned the role of men and boys in making sure that we have a equitable society where women have a role to play next to the men. So the African Union Initiative on Positive Masculinity was born in a process that led by women leaders themselves, the Africa Women Leaders Network, which is represented right now in more than 35 countries in Africa as sections, and where we realize that involving men leaders to engage other men, boys, and the society in general can make a huge contribution in changing the deeply entrenched power relation that fuel violence against women and girls. And again, it's not particularity of Africa. We found during COVID that violence, what we call this silent pandemic, have been everywhere, not just in our continent. But what we said is we need to reinforce our normative, and that's why we ask our head of state to convene consultation, making sure that we involve religious and traditional leaders, the young boys and young women in the discussion, having the private sector part, the academia, and all others stakeholders. So we have the two organized two consultation, but also two great conference to adopt, and the outcome of those two conferences led by head of states in our continent to adopt an African Convention on ending violence against women in Africa. And I'm happy to say that the last summit, the head of state in February in Addis Ababa, a decision was taken by our head of state to make sure that we put a process right now to start developing that mechanism, but making sure that at the end, we have a convention, an African convention on ending violence against women in Africa, to add on other instruments that is existing, but making sure that we focus on these particular issues and bringing solutions, looking into where countries that have adopted those solutions and to see how we can scale it up in various domains. And on this, I really wish to call on all your support, the OECD, and other stakeholders and the partners, and together we can promote positive masculinity and ending violence against women, not just in Africa, but elsewhere. So let me just quote by saying what the chairperson of the African Union said the other day: as long as women are not safe, no one is safe. So I think that is something we need to put ourselves on the spotlight, and making sure that women are safe and we provide that security for them. So let me thank you for, again, for the invitation, but for your kind attention as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madame Diop, for your remarks. I'll also quote your fellow countryman and the grandfather of African cinema, Ousmane Sembene, who said that it's not women that must be liberated, but it's men that need to be liberated.
Yeah, that is true. And it relates to what the presenter on India have said, that we need to bring others in the cultural, but also in the entertainment, in the film industries, but in around to change the attitude and to change our society. So the men need to be at the front. And I'm sure, Mr. Norman, as you said, you are a he for she, and we congratulate you for that. So leading in the positive masculinity circle. Thank you.
Thank you. I know it's not me. It's not only me. There are many. I'm hoping. So we're going to do a quick round of questions. There's some questions that are online, and if there are any questions within the room, just use your tag to signify. But let me first just field a question online. There's been a fair amount of chatter online about the value of edutainment and the role TV soaps can play to change social norms and stereotypes. The question is, have any impact analysis been conducted for media initiatives in order to measure how perceptions and attitudes have improved as a result of running these shows or these soaps? I'm going to go away from the panel a little bit and ask if Poonam wouldn't mind addressing that question and responding to the person online.
Happily, and thanks for asking that question. Globally, you will find a lot of literature on the evaluations and that have been done on behavior change programs. You know, they're expensive, they're labor intensive. And so the donors rightly have done evaluations, and not just by donors, there's a whole community of evaluators. And it is that community that we learned from on what to do and what not to do. Second, I want to respond on our program. Every season, which is 3 seasons we had, were evaluated by the best experts globally. These were external evaluations. I don't pay too much attention to internal evaluations. I'm referring to the external evaluations with pretty high standards. In fact, the fortunate thing is that behavior change communication does have solid, objective external evaluations. And our evaluations too for the 3 seasons were done by not just for TV and radio, but for digital media institutes like the Triangle Research Institute, which is a lead in evaluating digital evaluations. And there's a whole community out there as we go forward.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that. We're going to take one more question from the room. I'll recognize the delegate from UNESCO.
Thank you. Thank you very much. My name is Begonia Lasnica-Baster. I'm Director of Gender Equality UNESCO, and I have been working in UN Women and many other things. So I have been in gender also a little bit of time. And my question, of course, is always very good because the question is how you can convince the non-convinced. And I have to congratulate SIGI Index and OCDE because this is the 5th edition, if I'm not wrong, and always has been very good. Data is one of the reasons why people get to change their mind. Normally, if not, when we didn't have data, and we have done a lot of work on 511, et cetera, people thought we were talking about perceptions, or we were talking about things that it was not accurate and when we didn't have data. And I remember decades trying to say that this is happening, and until there was not some sort of will from donors or entities that dedicate to research to have data, it was very difficult to change any laws, having also been member of parliament. So because you ask for data. So I think that's to congratulate that we have data that allows not only quantitative, but qualitative. And we should go a little bit one step further on disaggregated the data. So we are not going to what somebody called the dictatorship's average. But anyway, data and congratulations. How we can convince, and I think entertainment is good. But my question, and I think I have talked to Batile and Heishin in CSW, is that media and online social media, it has very good positive, as we have seen, relevance to change people's minds and to have from non-convinced to convinced. But we are seeing also the opposite effect too. And this is something that is very, very really dangerous, and we are seeing very risky. And what we are seeing also as in UNESCO in different studies for journalists and women in journalism, that they receive 73% receive threats to social media, 30% they self-censor themselves, and 20% they quit social media. But the same in politicians, the same in women that are appearing in public life. So what I was thinking, and the other day we were thinking, the 3 of us, is that we have a different behavior when we enter into the social media. And I think we need to start thinking that maybe we have to study also what is how we human beings, men and women, behave in social media. Because what we are looking is that the behavior is different. And unfortunately, it's a behavior that is not going into the positive direction to support gender equality. How many times we have heard from the content moderators, panels from Meta or the people in Twitter, and that the way people react on social media is much more violent. Normal people much more violent against women that post things, and that also there is a lot of business behind that, and there is some sort of algorithm or artificial intelligence that could create a huge generative thing that really is going uncontrolled. So my point will be, and we are thinking, and I don't know if this is something that could be worth exploring, is do we have to, at this stage of the world, to start thinking also to explore what is the behavioral human behavioral within the social media that can be a very positive tool, but also can be very negative on going to the pushback of gender equality. Over.
Thank you for the question, and it's an excellent question. And I don't know if there are any. Do we still have the panelists online?
I'm sure you do.
We do. And maybe it's something. Maybe I'll ask either Alessandro or Priyanti to respond. Did you hear the question?
I heard part of it. It was sort of going in and out. So if you could sum it up again, that would be great.
The question was really about how do we prevent social media from, which is positive in terms of changing attitudes, but how do we also prevent some of the negative aspects of it, because people have different behaviors online or different personalities online, and how do we make sure that that is not detrimental to the cause that it's also promoting?
That is such an important question. I can try my best to answer from the experience that I've had, and I'm going to actually have to leave in about 5 minutes. So this will be the perfect way to say goodbye to you all, and thank you for the invitation. But going back to the question, I think the project that I told you about is just a testament to the power of digital, right? And sort of facilitating some of these conversations and facilitating collective action. So there's a lot to be said about the sort of positive aspects of having digital as present and prevalent in our societies, and how information can move through that, and how we can better organize people through it. However, you're absolutely right. There are also some real pitfalls. And I think we are now seeing that, particularly with the sort of emergent field of sort of very toxic masculinity being promoted online, right? And that is something that has always, of course, been there, but I think in recent years it has become much worse. I don't know how familiar the participants are with that world of sort of young men and boys online, essentially promoting misogynistic discourse and essentially preying on the insecurities and vulnerability, particularly of young men, as they try to find their own way in the world, and preying on that to essentially teach them the worst possible models of masculinity and accuse women of making their lives worse. So that's definitely there. In Brazil and other countries, they call themselves sort of the red pill movement, which I find particularly funny. But anyway, I think that that's just there. And that is not very different from sort of more radicalized communities that are acting online on other issues, right? This issue of gender-based violence and gender equality is not by any means the only one that they're going after. However, I do believe that it's central, including to other issues as well, right? Like at the center of a radicalization that also affects the environmental movement, activists at large. I think there is this issue, this fundamental issue of fragile masculinity and young men and boys meeting online and promoting hate speech, what is essentially hate speech. And there's not 1,000 ways to curb that, right? Like there's got to be more regulation, and I think that needs to happen at the national level. In Brazil, we're having this conversation right now, and that will have to happen in other countries as well. And that requires a conversation that is complex about the responsibility of the platforms, as you mentioned in your question. On the one hand, these platforms are not producing this content, but they are facilitating it. And depending on the platform, there is an algorithm that we just don't have access to. There's no algorithmic transparency. So we just don't know how this works, but we do know that the algorithm likes radical content and feeds you more and more radical content as you go through that rabbit hole. That is definitely true of YouTube, for instance, where it's very easy to get lost in sort of a sea of hate speech once you enter that world. And that is true of other platforms as well. So what is the responsibility that these companies and platforms have towards their users and towards society at large? That is a complicated discussion, but it's an urgent one, and that we have delayed for far too long. Of course, different countries and regions have made different strides towards regulation, which is great, but we're still far behind what is required to actually rein in on this kind of hate speech online. On the other hand, I also think that there is, aside from regulation, there is a need for us to be better at producing content for the same platforms that also promotes other kinds of models, right? And that is very hard to do. but we need to get better at it. So there is, I think, one part that is sort of changing the rules of that game, because clearly it's not a game that is working out for society. But there's also beating these sort of crazy radicalized communities at their own game, being able to produce better content and to really create narratives that can then introduce other mental models and values into the conversation through online and digital as well. So that would be my sort of initial questions. I know that, sorry, not questions, my initial answer. I know it's not a perfect one, but I don't think there's really other ways of doing that.
Thank you very much. Unfortunately, we're going to have to stop it there, the conversation. But I do want to give, Poonam just 2 minutes to for a follow-up for that, and then we'll move on to the next session.
So thank you very much. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity, because I think perhaps I have communicated, or we have collectively communicated, that just any television programs or what's happening in, no, not to you, the earlier question also. It is the need for importance of behavior change communication thoughtfully done in the cultural context, and that leads to behavior change. We have lessons for, but I am not saying at all that social media, all of this, we must use them positively. And I think you've raised a very important issue, and the world needs to do some evaluations of the impact that not only social media, but regressive social programs that have had on not just television, film industry, the imaging of women. Those are all big issues we need to deal with. And I just want to say that as access to digital media is increasing, it is at the same time empowering girls too, especially women. The more access they have, the more information we have to take out the information that leads to negative and regressive consequences. And we have to put in fact, the importance in this seminar of the title of the seminar, Changing Social Norms, becomes even more important, because we have to counter a lot of the regressive norms. And I want to end with a very quick 50-second story. There is, I was supporting some research as a donor, when I was a donor, on sexual behavior of young people. And one of the studies, I was stunned when I read, when the young street children were asked, what is the most pleasurable way of having sex? They said rape. So I went back to the researchers and I said, go back and ask why 100% said rape. They said, if you look at Hindi films, the formula of Hindi films till then was every film had a rape, a cabaret dance and a rape. And they said, look at the villain. He seems to be so happy raping a woman. So that must be the most pleasurable way. It's not that any of these kids had raped a woman. So I went to the film industry and I shared this research with them. I thought I'll have to do a campaign against them, but the minute they saw this research, rape disappeared from Indian films. It's a rare occurrence. So we have to take on the regressive norms that, not norms, regressive patterns and behavior that both the media, we have to be very vigilant. In fact, when I retire, I'm planning to write a book on the negative consequences of soaps in India, which I began to talk about, but there wasn't enough time. When we went to meet women in the community to get their feedback, they said, you're an antidote to these regressive social norms. Thank you.
Super. Thank you very much. Madame Job.
Yes, if 1 second, yes.
Yes, one second, and then unfortunately we have to move on.
Yeah.
1 minute.
So on the entertainment issues, I just wanted to add that yes, it's very good that we look the quality, of the content, but also the women leadership. It does matter. I think when we look at even in the United States, when we look at what Oprah Winfrey have done, it's just one example that to see that we have leaders that coming from Black community to be president and vice president, etc. So because we need to control the media, we need ourselves as women, next to the men, of course, but having that leadership position. So I think we in Africa, we are trying to make sure that in the media, but in other sectors of governance, like we are saying, the feminist policy, but not only that, but making sure that women in governance, in politics and others are at the core. And I think that is where we need also to see in the social media to control it and bring our input there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you to all of the panelists and to Poonam for joining the panel as well. I just want to say a big thank you, and please ask for a round of applause for everyone that has participated. Just in the interest of time, we're going to move directly into the next panel. And I'm going to, again, do the same thing in terms of presenting the panelists and then ask them a directional question so that they can so that it can inform their response. The next panel is changing attitudes and social norms. What role for governments and their development partners? I think the last conversation was a good segue into that and the role of regulation. And the role of policymakers, donors, and partners. And we can also delve a little bit more into using the SIGI tool. So our next speaker is the director of the OECD Development Center, Ms. Raga Arnadotir. She served as Minister of Industry and Commerce in Iceland from 2013 to 2017. Was as an elected member of parliament for the Independence Party. Before parliament, she held successive roles as political advisor for the Ministry of Finance, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and the Prime Minister. She also worked for the Trade Council of Iceland, both in New York and Reykjavik. Welcome. You are the director of the OECD Development Center. Can you talk a little bit about the importance of SIGI for the OECD Development Center and how policy markers use this, how policymakers can use this tool, and specifically maybe share some successful examples of how the SIGI framework helps uncover underlying biases and inequality?
Thank you very much, Rod. And thank you to all of the speakers. I have to put on my Director of the Development Center's hat before I put on the panelist hat and thank everyone for their fabulous interventions and comments. And Poonam, you are such a rock star. I just have to say this has been so interesting and so true. And I look forward and hereby plead to you to continue our good cooperation. But going to the SIGI, I think that if the SIGI didn't exist, we would invent it right now, because it just gives another picture of the issue, just like Batil described so well with the iceberg. The root causes. Why aren't there more women doing stuff that we all know they can do, and what is preventing them? And if we know that, then we can do something about it. And that's when I get to the policies. You know, what people expect women to do or not to do. Working outside the home, if it is perceived to be harmful for a woman's children. What people think women are good at or not good at as being a politician, or
it measures the time spent on unpaid care and the housework, and all of these things that is so difficult to measure. That is what the SIGI is intended to measure, and that's why it's so important. And like I said, would be invented if we didn't have it, but we do have it. So that is the good news. And we've had it for 15 years. SIGI has become a teenager. My son is going to be 15, and I know how much he has changed over those years. But it's high quality data. It's data that we make a lot of effort into getting, and make a lot of effort into treating it with good tools, and data that we then put our heads and minds and all of our efforts into analyzing in order to make policies. And it helps us unveil these gray areas. It reveals the full view of the discriminatory social institutions that we've been talking about, both laws and social norms at the national level that policymakers don't always have at hand. And the one important thing that we have to bear in mind, that this is only, it only has value if we do it over time. So we can measure progress. And that is what the 15-year teenager allows us to do now. We see and we can compare success stories to provide impetus for countries and governments to lead or to change. The SIGI has informed legal reform and policy change in several countries. We have a representative from Colombia here. The SIGI framework on masculinities informed the national movement for the unlearning of machismo and 𝐉𝐻𝐈𝐍, which engages men and women in critical reflections and the unlearning of machismo attitudes and practices. And I know that the ambassador of Ireland is going to talk about the work that Ireland has done on masculinities using the SIGI. Burkina Faso, SIGI was instrumental in shaping legislative changes, like a new law on violence against women that criminalizes marital rape. Tanzania, following a SIGI study, has put discriminatory social institutions front and center of their laws and policies, informing all sorts of legislative changes to better protect women and girls' inheritance rights, the child marriage, all of the issues that Batil mentioned here before. And it has put discriminatory social institution atop the Sustainable Development Agenda. And also, it's peer pressure. Countries want to compare, and they demand to see how they compare based on the index with their neighbors, with other regions. So it's an incentive to better yourself, better the country, better the policies, and progress. And that demand has led the center to produce also regional reports of the SIGI and country reports. So it accelerates the drive to change. And we have also targeted different areas. I mentioned the Colombian example. We have done studies on masculinities. Our seminal reports, Man Enough, provided the tools to systemically measure masculine norms. And that is so important because, as we have heard here today, it is not just a women's issue. And I'm so glad to see here in the room almost balanced ratio of men and women, because it cannot be women talking to women about issues that we all agree on, and then we go home and nothing happens. So and I promised you
your husband?
I was going to make sure that Rod doesn't feel all alone. My husband has followed me everywhere, and he's here with me in Paris, enjoying every minute of it. And I would not have been able to do whatever I have been doing over the last years if we didn't have the complete split. Well, complete. I'll admit it. He does much more. He does much more than I do.
We'll exchange numbers.
I know. You need to meet. But but I come from Iceland, a country that, you know, we are very proud of being at the top of the World Economic Forum Index, the Gender Gap Index. We have been there for 13 years. We are looked at as paradise of gender equality, and I'm very proud of it, and we're all very proud of it. But as I was saying to Batil, and I've said before, if you would listen to the dialogue in Iceland, and I'm looking at our Swedish colleague, probably know recognizes this. If we would listen to the dialogue in Iceland, you would think that we were at the bottom, because we are not there yet. And there's a new incident there was the Icelandic Oscars, speaking of the entertainment industry, where after the reward ceremony, women in the industry powerfully objected to the fact that in the nominations committee, there had been 4 women and I think 16 men or something. And they had statistics that prove that, or they claimed that affected the nominees and the results. So there's always something that comes up that demonstrates that we are not there, and I don't think we will ever be. But going to the importance of policies, the importance of legislation, for example, I think one of the reasons, or 2 of the reasons for why Iceland is at the top, one important one is policies on childcare and maternity and paternity leave. And I was fortunate enough in my previous life as political advisor to the finance minister in 1999 to be a member of a small committee that wrote the bill that changed the maternity and paternity law in Iceland and gave fathers and mothers equal rights. And not only that, they gave the father 3 months that they could not transfer to the mother. So this legislation, and it was 80% of pay. And this legislation gave the men a tool to go to their employers and say, listen, I need to take this, otherwise it goes to waste and my child doesn't have childcare. So the employer couldn't say no. Now, 22 years later, this was introduced in 2001. We have been for 13 years at the top. And this is one important factor, because if you get the men to be there from day one in the household and in the responsibilities, they are there. But then there's another factor. The factor, and that goes to us as women, because we bear the brunt of the household work, but we also have powers there that we don't want to give up. And that is, another example. I was traveling a lot when my oldest son was about 2 years old, and I'd been traveling. I wake up in the middle of the night, and he is shouting out, "Daddy, Daddy!" And I just, "You're not going anywhere." And I went and I took him, and I felt horrible. I felt like I was, a bad mother and all of this. But then I realized, of course, this is ridiculous. So this is also something that has to be done. And it's a cooperative thing between men and women. The other factor that has put Iceland at the top that I want to mention here, that's role models. And we have everything from the women's movement that stormed out, or rallied women to storm out one day in October 1978 to gather, stood up from whatever they were doing. Thousands of women gathered in the center of Reykjavik, and the country was paralyzed. And they built a women's
political party that forced the other political parties, including my political party, to put more women, to front of the list because they were losing all the female votes. In that spirit, the first woman in the world to be elected head of state was elected, Vigdís Finnbogadóttir, in 1982. And she was such a strong role model, and she still is. She's 92, 3 years old, sharp as a whistle. I saw her in September, and she's fabulous. She was such a role model that 16 years later, she held 4 terms. 16 years when there was finally again presidential elections. There was a like a 13-year-old boy, and he saw that there was posting the candidates, and he's like, wow, can men be presidents? That is a powerful role model, and she influenced every woman that I know and I have gotten to know through politics. I mean, she was just the stellar. But then there's another role model that I want to mention, not in politics, it's more in the entertainment industry. Just recently, 2 months ago, the captain of the Icelandic the women's soccer team, Sara Björk Gunnarsdóttir, she was the captain of the national team. She had been playing professionally, in a lot of countries. She won a pay claim against, sorry to the host country, to the French club Lyon, when they did not pay her, and they ousted her really when she became pregnant. And she took this to within the FIFA, the association. And to make a long story short, and I can give you the article that explains it, she won it. And this is another demonstration of a role model in an industry that women are up and coming, and anyone who follows football or soccer knows that the quality is superb. But this is, I mean, she said, this is not about me, this is for all women. Why, have you ever heard of a father that loses or a male soccer player that loses his salary if he's having a baby? No, and that shouldn't be. So we need all actors in society to come together. We need to make sure that these hindrances are we take them away. And that is what the SIGI and what we at the Development Center intend to do and are fighting to do, is to make sure that we have the data, the evidence, and the information needed to get rid of these biases that prevent gender equality from realizing. So we are here and we are eager to work with everyone on this, especially my colleague here from the Development Cooperation Directorate within the OECD, because this is also a whole of OECD issue that we want to promote and work together on.
Super, thank you. I think in the remarks it really brought home the representation is important, but also making sure that you have a vehicle to shine the light on areas that people may assume don't exist, right? Which is an important thing. So let us move to our next speaker, Madame Yao, online. Madame Yao is the Special Advisor to President of the Republic in charge of gender for Côte d'Ivoire. She's a 26-year work experience as a civil administrator and expert in gender and development. And she contributed to the establishment of a framework for promoting gender equality and women empowerment through the creation of the Directorate for the Promotion of Equality and Gender in Côte d'Ivoire. She was the first manager in charge, and in that role, she created the foundation policy docs, programs, and plans aimed at reducing gender inequalities. Welcome, Madame Yao.
Merci beaucoup. Je voudrais d'abord remercier l'équipe de l'OCDE de nous avoir demandé de participer à cette session, mais surtout parce que nous avons eu notre rapport SIGI qui nous a permis de voir les inégalités dans toutes les régions et de pouvoir trouver des mesures correctives. Comme on l'a vu en matière de genre, les normes, les traditions, la culture qui est notre identité compte beaucoup. Et quand on arrive à rentrer dans cette culture et trouver les éléments qui ne vont pas pour les corriger, en tout cas, ça marchait pour nous. Je vous remercie aussi également parce que j'ai vu le dernier rapport et je vois que la Côte d'Ivoire a fait un grand bond en avant. Un grand bond en avant, on était parmi les 165e pays au monde qui avaient des taux de discrimination élevés, mais aujourd'hui, on se retrouve parmi les 85 pays qui ont eu des taux de discrimination bas et même très bas. Et vraiment, on va se féliciter pour cela. Ça veut dire qu'avec le genre, le temps compte beaucoup et l'action devient une réalité. Alors, qu'est-ce que la Côte d'Ivoire a fait? Nous, en Côte d'Ivoire, nous sommes partis avec l'action macro. On est parti avec l'action macro, on est parti avec la transversalité, je vais expliquer. D'abord, le gouvernement a pris des lois progressives, c'est-à-dire des lois dans pratiquement tous les secteurs. On fait partie de l'un des pays dans lesquels la Constitution prône l'égalité des chances, la promotion au niveau de l'emploi, la lutte contre les violences basées sur le genre. On a des lois qui mettent le mariage à l'âge de 18 ans, qui condamnent les viols. Vraiment, l'État a tout mis en place pour nous aider, pour aider la société civile et les autres ministères à travailler. Ça, c'est notre point fort. Le deuxième point fort, c'est que les lois, en réalité, il y a une qui l'a dit, les lois ne peuvent pas à elles seules faire changer les normes et les cultures. Ce n'est pas possible. Alors, on a mis en place des programmes d'envergure. Je vais en citer quelques-uns qui ont vraiment fait leur preuve. Je parlerai du programme Compendium des compétences féminines de Côte d'Ivoire qui avait pour objectif de renforcer la visibilité, le leadership des femmes dans toutes les sphères de décision, aussi bien en milieu rural qu'au niveau des hauts cadres de l'administration. Et avec ce programme-là, on a eu des femmes de niveau pratiquement analphabètes qui sont devenues députées en Côte d'Ivoire, qui ont servi de rôle modèle. On a eu des femmes entrepreneurs qui ont développé leurs entreprises et aujourd'hui, c'est devenu comme une émulation au niveau de toute la société. Et on a un grand réseau de femmes qui peut agir sur les décisions de 17 000, plus de 17 000. Hier, j'avais 17 458 femmes dans cette même base de données en ligne. Et donc, ce sont ces programmes-là qui nous ont aidés à faire changer les normes, à se dire, mais on peut faire autrement. Et quand on voit les femmes leaders, aujourd'hui, il y a des entreprises qui nomment les femmes très facilement parce qu'ils ont vu ce qu'elles ont donné. Je vais donner un exemple très marquant. Il y a par exemple la douane de notre pays qui nous a dit, le directeur général nous a dit, chez nous ici, il y a 3 directions gérées par 3 dames qui ont fait 85% des recettes douanières. C'est-à-dire, sur les 10 directions, il n'y a que 3 dames seulement, mais elles ont fait 85% des recettes douanières. Donc, quand il le dit publiquement et qu'il dit que le Compendium l'a aidé à faire cela, les autres sont en train de suivre. Donc, c'est un bon programme que nous voulons partager. Le deuxième programme, c'est la première dame de Côte d'Ivoire qui a mis en place un fonds d'appui aux femmes de Côte d'Ivoire. Elle agit sur les vulnérabilités parce que tant que les femmes ne seront pas économiquement indépendantes, les normes, elles ne peuvent même pas ouvrir la bouche pour parler. Comme on disait tout à l'heure, c'est la belle-mère qui parle, c'est le mari qui parle. Et elle a mis 48 milliards de francs CFA qui ont touché près de 300 000 femmes. Et ça aussi, ça a aidé l'État à avancer. Mais il n'y a pas que les programmes, il y a d'autres programmes que je ne citerai pas. Il y a aussi des études qu'on fait, comme je disais, par exemple, avec le SIGI, qui nous ont beaucoup aidé à voir où on va, à corriger. Et il y a surtout l'implication des différents ministères, des différentes structures dans la prise en compte du genre. Parce que nous, on est parti avec l'égalité des chances hommes-femmes. Quand je vois le ministre de l'Intérieur qui dit aujourd'hui, je vais travailler à ce que les femmes participent au processus de paix, je me rends compte qu'on n'a que 5 à 10% de femmes et je vais le faire. Nous, on se réjouit parce que la transversalité donne des résultats. Quand je vois des ONG qui sont sorties du compédium, qui aujourd'hui sont celles-mêmes qui luttent contre les viols, contre les mutilations génitales féminines, parce qu'elles ont compris, elles ont été formées et je me dis que la transversalité que nous avons choisie, le fait que chaque étape, même le ministère de l'économie, ils sont passés au budget programme, ils sont en train de passer à l'analyse budgétaire selon le genre pour voir l'impact du budget qu'on met. Donc, la Côte d'Ivoire a trouvé cette approche-là. Et comme on me présentait tout à l'heure, nous, pour conscientiser les gens, pour faire changer les normes et les cultures, on met en place des outils. Je présente l'ingénierie du genre. On forme des hommes, des femmes. Cette année, par exemple, en master, on a 18 hommes, 17 femmes. Je vous assure, quand ils finissent de faire cette formation, leur regard change, leur mentalité change. Et imaginez ces experts-là qui travaillent pour les autres personnes. Donc, c'est ce qu'on fait et on a mis aussi un outil en place qu'on a appelé COFA, qui aide beaucoup les personnes qui travaillent sur les normes. Co, c'est conscientisation. On peut sensibiliser sans conscientiser. On ne peut pas forcer en fait, parce que nos normes font partie de notre vie. Donc, quand tu les conscientises, ils prennent des décisions. Le deuxième élément, c'est la formation. On les forme à des outils du genre. Je vous ai parlé la dernière fois de l'ingénierie du genre, pour qu'ils comprennent eux-mêmes et qu'ils décident. On ne les force pas. C'est vrai qu'en matière de discrimination, si on veut trop s'attaquer, qu'on ne fait pas comprendre, on peut avoir des problèmes. Et eux-mêmes, ils agissent. Donc, pour vous dire un peu, c'est ce que la Côte d'Ivoire a fait et je suis sûre de cette approche parce que la preuve, on peut partir aujourd'hui des premiers pays africains dans lesquels l'indice de discrimination est faible et j'en suis très heureuse. Je voulais conclure, je sais qu'on n'a pas assez de temps, pour dire que les normes, la culture, les institutions sociales, il faut du temps, il faut de la connaissance, il faut de la méthodologie, il faut réinventer pour que ça change, parce que c'est une affaire de culture, c'est une affaire d'identité culturelle qui est difficile à démanteler. Je vous remercie.
Merci beaucoup, madame. Et c'est très important que ça prenne du temps. Ça prend du temps. Donc, merci pour avoir soulevé cette point. Okay, so next we are moving to Ambassador Keon. Ambassador Keon has a long career in the Department of Foreign Affairs, having held a range of senior posts since 1996, including diplomatic advisor in the Department of Finance, ambassador to the Republic of Poland, and director of strategy, where he coordinated a review of Irish foreign policy. The ambassador is also an author, in addition to his diplomatic career, having written First of Small Nations, The Beginnings of Irish Foreign Policy in the Interwar Years. Welcome, Ambassador.
Thank you, Roderick. It's great to be here. Good afternoon, everybody.
Let me just ask you to talk. Oops, sorry. Let me just ask you to talk a little bit about Ireland's experience in reducing gender-based discrimination. You were one of the first countries to apply the OECD's masculinities framework to national data. And also just touch on SIGI's role in identifying solutions to how boys and men can acknowledge and make changes?
Sure, two good questions. I mean, first of all, let me say a big thank you to the OECD and to the Development Center for the SIGI Index. We all know that despite the great progress that's been achieved globally towards full and equal, meaningful equality for women, there's still a journey to go. And the role of SIGI and the contribution that it makes in measuring over time developments across the world is really important. It's really important for assisting governments to identify where their gaps are and where they need to use scarce public resources. And I can talk a little bit about that from our experience. It also provides data that civil society can use to hold governments to account. And it provides a basis for all of us to engage with international and regional bodies so that they can better support governments and civil society in the journey that we all need to go towards full gender equality. And we're at the halfway point towards the SDGs, and we're not where we need to be on that either. We need to see our foot on the accelerator if we are to achieve SDG 5, and we can't achieve the rest of the SDGs if we don't achieve SDG 5. So what we're talking about here today is really important. So a big thank you to the OECD. And that's really important if we're talking about participation in peace processes, if we're talking about the fight against climate change, or about getting better productivity for our businesses and our economies. And while we should never need a cost and benefit analysis for equality, if we need one, the OECD has produced it, because it has established that for OECD area economies, if we had full gender equality in terms of labor market participation, by 2060, our collective GDP figures would be 10 percentage points higher. And just think we had a fraction of that now in terms of revenues, the services that we could provide to our societies would be significantly larger. So this is about economics as well as about equality and about doing the right thing. So for Ireland, SIGI, really important tool. I mean, our country has been on a journey. We have a way to go further, and SIGI is helping us with that, and also the Man Enough Index on restrictive masculinities. A few changes in recent years since 2015. I think there's been quite a big social transformation in Ireland. In 2015, we became the first country to vote by popular referendum to establish full and equal access to marriage for gay and lesbian couples. We've also legislated in the same year to enable transgender persons to select their gender and to have this choice reflected in official documents provided by the state. We held a referendum to repeal an article in our constitution, replacing it with a provision freeing Parliament to legislate for greater access to abortion services. And as this most recent round of SIGI has noted, we've tightened up legislation on child marriage to remove any legal exemptions that allowed girls and boys to marry before the minimum legal age of 18. So that's an equal minimum age for boys and girls. Some of the enabling factors in these changes have been putting in place consultative mechanisms to enable national conversations to take place. And one of the vehicles that we've used has been a citizen assembly model comprising 100 randomly but representatively selected citizens established under Parliament to discuss issues of national importance, to provide recommendations to Parliament, which Parliament would then take up. And each of those referendums that I've spoken about had their origins in a citizen assembly, and we continue to use that tool. And in fact, the most recent of our citizen assemblies to have reported was dedicated to the subject of gender equality. What further do we need to do in Ireland to achieve that objective of full gender equality for our citizens? And that was charged with looking at social norms and attitudes facilitating gender discrimination towards girls and boys, and examining the social responsibility of care. And the Assembly came up with 45 recommendations covering a wide range of areas such as workplace conditions, domestic, sexual and gender-based violence, social protection, and the subject we're here to talk about today, norms and stereotypes. And our government has said that it will take forward those recommendations. One of those is an announcement made last month to hold a referendum later this year to repeal a section of our constitution dating from 1937, which contains very traditional language on the role of women in the home. And I think that speaks that whole point about norms and standards. I think it's fair to say that in our society, there has been a lot more said and spoken about the roles of women than there have been about men. And having these statements in important foundational documents whilst remaining silent on the role of men, I think both of those are significant. And so this will be an important occasion And that referendum has only just been announced, so we have to see how that progresses over the course of this year. The Man Enough Index on restrictive and gender equitability masculinities has been a really important tool for us. And we were the first OECD country to take it up. And we took it up because we heard a briefing on it at the CSW. And our team in our ministry charged with this equality were impressed with it and found it a good and interesting way at looking at, I suppose, something that had always been present in our approach. All of our national strategies always spoke about the importance of engaging men and boys, but our focus had been exclusively or largely on positive ways to assist women to attain equality, and not looking at the steps we need to do to bring men along on that journey too. And as I think many of the speakers have been saying, we need to address men and boys' attitudes if we're to advance as far as we wish to on this journey together. We applied the 10-point index to our national data, and I'm going to say a little bit of a word about data in a moment because it's not an OECD meeting if we don't talk about data. But we applied that index, and it's a way of taking a cold, hard look at your country and your society, and it might reveal some positive societal attitudinal changes, and it did in our case, and it does, but it might also reveal some things that are more concerning, and those things might identify where you need to target public resources. So, for example, we found that despite the vast majority of the population approving of a man taking parental leave, almost half of eligible fathers don't do so. And so we have to ask ourselves, why is that the case? Is that around popular attitudes towards caring responsibilities? Is that about attitudes within the workplace? Is that about the way the legal entitlements to parental leave are framed? Sort of a basket of issues that need to be interrogated if we're to get that figure up the dial where we want it to be. We learned that the labour participation rate of women last year was highest in the human and health work sectors, but lowest in the construction sector. And so that speaks to a phenomenon in many of our societies, gendered approaches to employment, and what's behind that. And is that something that we need to look only in the workplace, or is that something that we need to step right back into the education sector? And I can say a little word about that. And we found that being the breadwinner is seen as the most important role for a man, but the same figure is much lower for women. And that's a really concerning statistic, and we need to interrogate what's behind that. So about data, all of our societies have, and our governments have, huge amounts of data. And in fact, getting on top of that data and drawing the right conclusions and the best uses from it is an increasing challenge. And what we found is that the SIGI index on positive masculinities helped us look at our data sets in a new way to help us maybe identify where we needed to do more. We also found that we had some gaps. Some of those gaps, perhaps unsurprisingly, were largely in the space of the domestic environment, attitudes towards the family or in the home. And I don't think Ireland is unique in recording that phenomenon. Applying this lens to our national data has helped inform work that's underway towards establishing a whole of government new equality data strategy, which will be really important to underpin our work on gender inequality budgeting and on tracking expenditure, because at a time when all governments are pressed for resources, we need to be making the best decisions about how we use those resources and tailoring and targeting our interventions so that they deliver the results that we and our society, our citizens, expect from government. Last year, we introduced a mandatory reporting requirement for large organizations for information on their gender pay gap. And already that is yielding an interesting picture. It allows opportunities for peer learning. It will probably also create a little bit of peer pressure, and that's probably no bad thing, as we want to get, we have seen progress in reducing our gender gap in recent years, but we still have a further journey to go to get there. And I think what all of this does, it speaks to that SIGI recommendation on the importance of making the invisible visible, so that if we don't see the problem statistically, we don't have a basis for governments to apply resources or to tailor the right interventions. I think another area where this index has been really helpful for us so far, and we're only at the beginning of applying this, has been to identify better language and ways to describe and challenge restrictive norms without alienating sectors of the population. And here I think we're talking largely about men and boys. How do we start conversations? When do we do it? Where do we do it? In a way that opens up space to talk about assumptions And we need to do that in a way that it brings boys and men along on the journey, but we need to recognize that also some of those assumptions are affecting the choices that women and girls are making, and that these are interrelated. So we're using this a lot in our education work. I think conversations in the classroom are really important. Conversations in the schoolyard, probably even more important, but in youth clubs, in sports clubs, and of course in the family home, about career choices, about curriculum choices, about the expectations about what employment choices young women and young men might make. For example, we have discovered in Ireland that the image, we have a big digital section to our economy, and we've discovered that the popular image of a tech startup is young and male. Why is that? And then we discovered that if you drill into that, it's because funding is much harder to get at if you're a women entrepreneur in our tech sector. So we need to then tailor our supports, and we are doing that through our government enterprise agency to ensure that that is no longer the case. We equally see that in our agricultural sector. We talked about land ownership. There are no barriers to female land ownership, but there's just a lower visibility in Ireland's agricultural sector for women agricultural workers and farm managers or owners. And again, we're tailoring interventions to our agriculture ministry to address that. And again, that's data-based. If we didn't collect that data, we wouldn't know it, and we couldn't defend the use of resources to that end. I think it's important, and the point that Puna made about media, and that a colleague from UNESCO spoke about, and as Alessandra did too. Yes, media can play a really positive role. I think we all remember, or can, the first interracial kiss on US TV was an episode of Star Trek, and I can remember the first same-sex kiss on Irish TV was in a long-running and still going soap opera. So these can be positive, but equally the challenges around social media and the intersection of what I think we could call toxic masculinity is something that we really are all struggling with. And in my mind, that really speaks to the importance of digital literacy, of involving, of having that subject in the school, of explaining to people the implications and the consequences of things that are said online in the real world. Things that perhaps, and this was alluded to, that you mightn't say in person, but you feel free to say to the ether. I think sport has a big role here too to play, and sports clubs and organizations are playing that role. So I think that there's a lot of work further to go that we can do there. A wider learning we have made in our journey is that applying this index can have broader positive outcomes. I think tackling gendered perceptions of family, parenting, career, and professional roles can bring multiple benefits in terms of well-being, social inclusion, and better workplace outcomes for everyone in society. And I think this highlights another key component in the SIGI approach, that's the necessity of taking an intersectional approach. None of us lead our lives in tidy boxes, and so our policy interventions shouldn't be put or framed in tidy boxes either. I think in our experience, there are relevant wider work on diversity and inclusion that can benefit this. For example, advancing the rights of LGBTI persons, and as a gay man myself, I can speak personally to the importance of addressing what it means to be a man when you're talking about the equality of all in our society. I think going down this road can and will yield better physical and mental health outcomes. And I think that's really important for us individually, but also if we think the percentage of public GDP being spent in our health services or the costs to our economy, it becomes all the more compelling. And I think on the island of Ireland, in the year that we are celebrating the 25th anniversary of the Good Friday Agreement, I think it's really important to recall the importance of a gender lens when we're looking at peace processes, reconciliation work, and conflict work. And this was been spoken to very eloquently by a number of the speakers who joined us online, and it speaks to the whole women, peace and security agenda at an international level. In our own country, we had positive experience in the Northern Ireland peace process of a cross-community, women-only political party called the Northern Ireland Women Coalition at a time when almost all of the political parties were represented by male lineup. So there are multiple benefits and gains, I think, to applying this lens. So from our experience, we're only beginning. And of course, a next phase for us is we'll have to sort of measure all this data in a couple of years' time. Raga, to speak to the point you said that you need to be able to measure developments over time and then to sort of see where we've got and where we've done better and where we need to continue to do more. We would encourage other countries to apply this approach to their national data. We hope that this will be a beneficial tool nationally, but of course it will open up the opportunity of peer review and cross-learning. And I think that will be a strength and a benefit for all. If you allow me 2 quick broader points, I want to take this back to the global level. We're not where we are globally. The SIGI index highlights really shocking statistics that despite the fact there has been a narrowing between developed and developing countries, there's still a very stark finding that 40% of girls and women still live in countries with high or very high levels of discrimination, that there are gaps in upper secondary school completion among the poorest rural girls and the richest urban girls ranges from 11.5 to 72.2 percentage points. That's baked in inequality. We need to do more to provide education and access to opportunity for all in our societies to achieve our potential. To do this, we must tackle safety and security for women and girls, and the appalling figures on sexual and gender-based violence are an urgent call on all of us to action. Finally, a quick point. I strongly believe that equality is everybody's business. We all have a responsibility and a contribution to play. And looking at this from a government perspective, I think that the more we have our own house in order nationally, in terms of having the fullest gender and broader equality in our societies, the better advocates we are at international level to encourage others on the path that we hope we can all continue to travel on together. So I think this brings me back not just to our values, but it brings us back to SIGI, because SIGI provides us with the tools, the evidence, the data to do all of that. So I think I might leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you for those remarks. And I think you brought home kind of, for me, kind of bringing the invisible to light, right? And the important role that SIGI has in doing that. So thank you for that. Moving on to our next speaker, Mrs. Maria del Pilar Garrido Gonzalo, the Director of the Development Cooperation at the OECD. Ms. Garrido Gonzalo served as Minister of Planning and Economic Policy in Costa Rica from 2018 to 2022, and was responsible for, amongst other things, climate resilient development, sustainable public investment, public sector reform, and development cooperation policy. She also served as Deputy Minister of Planning and Economic Policy, a part of the Technical Secretariat for 2030 Agenda, and was a senior advisor. Prior to this, she spent more than 10 years at the country level working on sustainable development projects. Welcome. Can you speak about guidance for development partners on gender equality and the empowerment of women and girls, which is a practical guide or a guide for practitioners, which provides checklists, recommendations, and how donors can incorporate social norms angle into their work?
Yes, thank you very much. Please allow me to start by saying that I'm very happy to be here with Raga, my colleague, as in also how to build synergies between and within the development cluster and address those development issues, and gender being one of the most close to our hearts. So the first thing is that reshaping discriminatory social norms has always been a concern also for our DAC members, our Development Assistance Committee members. For those of you who the acronyms, you sometimes get lost, this is very OECD. And then, and this also as a foundation on how to achieve sustainable development and how to tackle transformative change. So this is why SIGI is so relevant for us too, because it actually speaks and gives us outcome data on otherwise things that have to do with social norms and has to do with legal issues. And also it will help my team, which are here too, in order to rethink together along with our GenderNet, how can we make improve our development cooperation activities, and how how can we use them to be more effective. So when speaking about the guidance now, this is something we have been working with our DAC members and our gender in it. So this guidance helps us to rethink, and it's like a handbook actually for all types of development partners, and how to rethink programs and projects of cooperation, how to design them better, how to also in implementation monitor and evaluate them better, to make them to make sure that they actually contribute the best and more effectively to gender equality. Also, this guidance also helps us in how to rethink how to better finance gender equality. As for now, you know, we monitor development finance with gender equality objectives, and what we have been seeing is that it has currently plateaued at 44% of bilateral aid, which integrates what is dedicated to gender equality. This is about $57.4 billion. So we have seen a slight decrease, which is a worrying tendency, but has to be hopefully urgently reversed. So this guidance also speaks to how to address discriminatory social norms. And when we think about this, we should think not only and reframe the burden from women and girls' own agency. You know, it's not about our own individual agency. It's also about how do we look at it from a collective responsibility, from a broader perspective, and how to engage in more systemic and structural change, and how do the rest of individuals fit into those more systemic changes. Some of the things that we believe our donor community can actually work on and that we have identified in our guidance speak to Batil's points in the beginning. The first one would be working with local organization and feminist organization and feminist movements. We acknowledge that there is capacity to accelerate some of the positive changes in communities by and through this local organization and feminist movements. But as for now, as DAC members, we are only given less than 1% to finance those organizations in terms of gender equality. The second one is, however, we also have good news, because we have been thinking about innovative ways on how to contribute and find solutions to strengthen support for this local women's movements. And there are some very positive ideas, like the Women's Fund, which is bringing together different development donors and their funding, and just making them channel them through grassroots organizations and these women's rights organizations. And we have examples of those, like, for example, the Women, Peace and Humanitarian Fund, or the Equality Fund, or the Netherlands Leading from the South initiative. And speaking to Ambassador Keong also, we also believe that achieving structural and transformational change has to do with engaging men and boys and youth, which is also part of the SIGI, and gender equality will not happen solely if it relies on women's empowerment. And in order to leave no one behind and continue to be impactful and sustainable over time, we need our gender equality approaches to be inclusive, and also to focus on different types of inequalities that intersect gender. So there we could have age, race, sexual orientation, and disability. So we need to support change that does not harm any single individual. And to keep it very short, I will finalize saying that we're going to redouble our efforts, and we need to redouble our efforts to support not only women's rights, but understand this in an overall gender equality and democratic development vision, as in how we're going to, the more we deepen our experiences on gender equality, the more vibrant our democracies are going to be. Thank you.
Thank you very much for those comments. Now, let me just say a special thank you to our last panelist for being patient and for waiting through all of the others. It's never a great place to be, but it's an important place to be, and we thank you for being with us as the final speaker on this panel. Let me introduce Mr. Dong-Han Yang, who is the Deputy Permanent Representative of Korea to the OECD. Mr. Yang has been the Deputy Permanent Rep of Korea to the OECD since 2022. Prior to this, he served as Director General for Bilateral Economic Affairs, and in 2016, Deputy Counsel General, Korean Consulate General in Chicago in the US. He's exercised numerous representation and advisory positions across the globe, including Minister Counselor, Korean Embassy in the Philippines, Counselor at the Korean Embassy in Gabon, and Conseiller Permanent Mission to the UN in Geneva. Welcome, Mr. Yang.
Thank you. Thank you, Roderick. And as you said, there's the last speaker. I'd like my best to be brief. To begin with, I'd like to welcome the SIGI's fifth data release. Also, I'd like to extend my heartfelt appreciation to the SIGI team for their hard work and commitment to the cause of the SIGI for better lives through helping formulate better social institutions that promote gender equality across the globe. I'd like to briefly touch upon the challenges we are facing now. As all of us are well aware, gender equality can be realized only by eliminating all forms of social discriminations that impede women's and girls' rights, opportunities, and access to resources. However, it is important to note that during the past 3 years marked by a crisis encompassing the pandemic, geopolitical turmoil, and economic crisis, the situation of gender equality has regrettably deteriorated. In particular, more women were laid off than men in tourism and in-person service sectors, which typically employ more women than men and experience more severe impact from the pandemic. Also, the burden of household tasks and family caregiving responsibilities borne by women has increased notably. Moreover, the pandemic period has witnessed escalation in violence against women. Recent research conducted by the United Nations substantiates these findings. We can conclude that social safety net for women has been inadequate, with the situation more dire in developing countries than developed countries. Given the circumstances, we recognize the urgency of taking action to prevent further deterioration of gender equality. To achieve this, I wish to emphasize the importance of collaborative efforts from the international community. Furthermore, I wish to highlight the need for the international community to adopt more proactive and forward-looking measures to advance gender equality at this pivotal juncture, a mere 7 years before the target year of SDGs. Now, I'd like briefly to touch upon Korea's experience and efforts in extending support to partner countries in their pursuit of gender equality. First and foremost, Korea's experience of economic development has demonstrated the immeasurable significance of promoting women's rights and expanding their economic activities, leading to positive spillover effects on its economic development and modernization of local communities. In the process, we have come to understand that the elimination of social discrimination against women could contribute to the socio-economic development and strengthening of resilience. Through this journey, we have also reached the invaluable understanding that social institutions and norms cannot be changed overnight. Based on these experiences, Korea extends its unwavering support to partner countries in their efforts to promote gender equality. Furthermore, Korea has established its legal and institutional framework to mainstream gender equality in its development assistance since 2010. According to the institutional framework, Korea's 5-year ODA strategy set gender equality as a cross-cutting issue to be addressed in all ODA programs and projects. The Korean government has increased the ODA targeted for gender equality by 7 times from 2012 to 2021. Furthermore, Korea International Cooperation Agency, KOICA, has established this midterm strategy for gender equality for 2021 to 2025. This strategy integrates the SIGI's 4 areas into its strategic objectives in ways to support women's economic empowerment, enhance social status of women, and ensure the protection of the rights of women and girls. Secondly, we have supported to promote gender equality in developing countries by focusing our efforts on health, education, and economic capacity building sectors. Throughout this process, we have been mindful and respectful of the priorities and unique circumstances of our partner countries. Taking this opportunity, I would like to share an example of an economic capacity building program conducted in one Southeast Asian country. In this case, there was a displacement camp where many women had lost their jobs. With support from KOICA and an NGO, a social enterprise was established, providing sewing jobs to these women using sewing machines. 𝐃𝐀 also assisted the women in forming a cooperative. The benefits of this program not only generated income, but also fostered the sense of self-confidence through their participation. We highly value this experience as it enabled women to rise as agents of change in their pursuit of gender equality. Lastly, I would like to highlight the SIGI serves as the official source for monitoring SDG indicator 5.1.1. I wish to emphasize the importance of the SIGI in monitoring and measuring discriminatory social institutions and norms against women and girls in 179 countries in a comprehensive, consistent way, and over a long period of time. Taking into account, 𝐃𝐀 adopted the SIGI as a key performance indicators for gender equality programs. The Korean government supported the 5th SIGI update in Southeast Asia report published in 2021. Finally, amid an unprecedented public crisis, we have to navigate uncharted waters toward gender equality and sustainable development. I sincerely hope that the SIGI will continuously serve as a guiding light, eliminating any discriminatory social norms and institutions. I am confident that the SIGI as a consistent, evidence-based, and comprehensive indicator could provide an invaluable platform for informed policymaking, ultimately leading to better lives for gender equality. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. And let me just say thank you to all of our panelists for the very enlightening remarks and responses. Unfortunately, we're not going to have time for questions given the time. But I do just want to say there was a couple takeaways from the sessions, and I'll try and sum it both panels, which will be a bit difficult. But there are 5 key takeaways things that I took away. One is that institutional reforms matter, but consequences are needed, and implementation is important as we look forward. 2, that collaboration is important, both inside the organization, outside with other partners, and with citizens. Ambassador Keon talked about some of the citizens' efforts in his country, and the fact that they could be scaled up. Some of the CSOs partners talked about the ability to scale up initiatives that they were doing, but the need for government support in terms of rolling them out much wider. I think everybody can agree that representation and language matters as we look forward to building role models, using entertainment. Data matters, because shining a light on the invisible is important, peeling back the onion, and giving policymakers the ability to defend and to argue for resources is important. Economics is important. The fact that this has a real economic push, that GDP could have been significantly impacted if we bring gender into the equation. There's progress that still needs to be made, and certainly as SIGI is now a teenager, we need to continue to support the teenager and make sure that it develops into a mature and responsible adult. I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for all our panelists, but also I would really like to give special thanks to our moderator, Rod. So thank you so much. We've ran out a lot of time, but still, thank you so much for our participants on site and online who's still with us, even if we ran over a lot of time. So I would really like to thank for all of your participation. And we are here. If you have any feedback or comments or questions, do be in touch with us. We're all very much going to be very happy to be walking the talk with you. I have 2 more things. So Ms. Ayumi Yuasa, our Deputy Director of the OECD Development Center, will just offer some closing remarks, followed by a new brand new SIGI video that was developed also by our comms team. Ayumi.
Thank you, Hishin, and I would like also thank to all the panelists and great speakers for bringing their unique viewpoints and experiences to the table. And also thank you all for joining us today in person and also online. I hope you all agree that we had a great discussion today, and we were especially fortunate to have had this discussion together with our colleagues from Development Cooperation Directorate, Pilar and her team, and who serves as the Secretariat to the Development Assistance Committee, DAC, to explore together the ways how donors or development partners can leverage and further integrate SIGI data into their interventions to address discriminatory social norms and institutions. Today, we have learned about the progress made since the last edition of the SIGI. We now need to focus on how to accelerate these progress. And to do so, and at the OECD, we remain committed to promoting gender equality all around the world and identify good practices and policy options to make change a reality. Just as a few examples, let me recap our efforts led by Raga and Pilar. As a pioneer in research on what we call social institutions, discriminatory social institutions, since the early 2000s, the OECD Development Center, headed by Raga, has been producing a series of analyses and reports demonstrating the negative impact of restrictive social norms on girls and women across their life cycle. The creation of the SIGI in 2009 as a comprehensive index looking at legal frameworks, norms, and practices is an attempt to provide the evidence and make it comparable, to depict any trends over time, and to promote concrete policy recommendations. At the same time, the OECD's Development Cooperation Directorate, headed by Pilar and her team, has been at the forefront of the discussions to strengthen gender equality in development programs and to secure girls' and women's rights, notably through the Development Assistance Committee's Network on Gender Equality, or GenderNet. The guidance for development partners titled Gender Equality and the Empowerment of Women and Girls, which Pilar kindly shared us today, puts the need for addressing discriminatory social norms at the heart of our strategies. Today's discussion has been rich with many examples of policies and development programs that successfully shifted restrictive norms and practices. For example, we learned that we could confront gender inequality and shift discriminatory social norms through entertainment, with a great example from India. And we learned about how to tackle the violence against women, or the importance of adopting a gender lens into the women and security and peace, and also the sustainable development. With this and with the new SIGI database, and we are now equipped with the data, facts, and practical experiences to help move the needle in favor of gender equality. This event has highlighted that donors play a key role in influencing the development agenda in that regard, and civil society organizations working on the ground need to be supported to amplify their actions for lasting change. Your presence today is a testimony of your great strong support for gender equality, and let me stress again that OECD stands ready to continue strengthening its work on this area. Lastly, what's next? We will continue disseminating the SIGI result globally and across regions, and we will launch the SIGI 2023 Global Report in July at the Women Deliver 2023 conference. The Global Report will feature 2 new horizontal chapters, one on climate change and the other on sexual and health and reproductive rights. As we further our work, we remain open to any collaboration opportunities so that we can add new thematic analysis, carry regional and country level activities, or co-organize policy dialogue events to continue peer learning or peer pressure. And if you would like to help us disseminate the SIGI result into your country or with your networks, please let us know. And let me conclude by thanking all the panelists and speakers and all for a truly enriching and inspiring discussion today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, all. Now we can pack up and enjoy our networking, also the celebration of the SIGI's launch event. And at the same time, Sabrina will show us the SIGI video. Thank you.